Hey number ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking, and whenever we imagine the ancient Romans, we think of the soldiers marching, fighting, building, but rarely really stop to imagine how our ancestors dealt with everyday needs. For example, everyone needs to go to the toilet, right? Which for us is a very straightforward situation. We go to a separate and dedicated room for privacy, we lock the door, do what we need to do on a dedicated large bowl of ceramic, porcelain, connected to a system for flushing and away the waste into a sewer. We then use toilet paper, push a button or pull a chain, flush everything, and then sanitize ourselves with soap. And if you're European, you also sometimes use this arcane magical thing. If you're Japanese, it's a robot, by the way. A robot. Anywho, we also spray deodorant if needed. But in ancient Rome, well, many of the things I've just said were not available. No separate room in common houses or public toilets, usually. No toilet paper. Soap existed, but it wasn't as common, at least until the 2nd century. No ceramic involved, no buttons, no chains, no robots. So how? First, we should ask who we are talking about. When out on patrol or marching, Roman soldiers would just go whenever they were. Just like when you go out camping, for instance, to imagine it, in the nature. Back at the fort, situation was slightly different. They shared communal toilet spaces. Such can be found at the Hadrian's Wall. The toilets had their own plumbing and sewers, sometimes using water from bathhouses to flush them. If bathhouses weren't around, any excess water would be used. Now, the Romans did not have toilet paper. Instead, they use a sponge on a stick to clean themselves. Yeah, I know. If you were a soldier, you would have your own. But what about if you were like, for example, just a common guy, right? Living in a Roman city, you really needed to go and went to a public latrine. The chances are you didn't really bring that thing around with you all day long. So yeah, you used the one provided by the latrine, meaning used by hundreds of people. Gosh, that's disgusting. Okay, so we established the disgusting sponge on a stick situation. What about these Roman latrines? How were they? So Roman public latrines were basically rooms lined with stone or wooden bench seats placed over a sewer. The toilet holes were round on top of the bench, but also had a narrower slit extended forward down over the edge. You have to imagine it in a sort of keyhole shape. These slits were most likely used to insert the sponge stick for personal cleaning, if one can call that cleaning. Along the ground running parallel to the seats, there were small gutters with running water. Probably these were used to clean said sponges in the running water after use, so that, someone else could, sorry, still gross. In the archaeological finds, there are no signs of barriers between the toilet seats, so basically there was no privacy, if not that provided by the long garments and the limited windows. What about home toilets? How common were they? How did they work? Well, the Romans adopted toilets like no one else at the time. So one thing you need to understand is that the very basic and primitive versions of toilets were invented in Mesopotamia in the late 4th millennium BC. So, toilets have been around for a very long time. But calling them toilets is a little misleading because these were basically just pits about 4.5 meters deep, non-flushing, lined with a stack of hollow ceramic cylinders about 1 meter in diameter. However, at this time, only very few houses would have toilets in Mesopotamia, possibly 1 out of 5. Everyone else would probably just use a chamber pot, empty it somewhere, or simply went out into the fields. So even though toilets have been around for a very long time, their effects for the population and general health weren't that great at first. And the reason for that is that studies by the US Agency for International Development say that some 75% of the population must have access to an invention before there are widespread improvements in health. So, in Rome, the situation was different. Around the 1st century BC, public latrines became a major feature of Roman infrastructure, similarly to bathhouses. So when you imagine that there were many bathhouses in ancient Rome, where there were also many public latrines, and nearly all city dwellers had access to private toilets in their residence. So did this improve the general health and sanitary condition of the Roman population? Well, not as much as you would think. We know that sewers were a very Roman thing, and they surely helped life conditions. But when we say sewers, we shouldn't really remove the adjective Roman or ancient Roman in front of them, because otherwise we'll make the mistake of associating the effectiveness of modern sewers to that of the sewers used in the classical period by Rome. For instance, modern principles of sanitation engineering engineering dictate that sewers need regular aeration, which Roman sewers didn't provide. Also, modern sewers need features to control the deposition of solid waste, and these are there to reduce the stench as well as improve flow. Again, a feature missing in Roman sewers. If we look at the Cloaca Maxima, which is the great sewer around Rome, the biggest one, because of the way it's constructed, it would get blocked and clogged in less than a year. So at the very least, if they did it, they would have required regular cleaning. And good luck to those who took that shitty job, literally. Also, another of the many problems coming from this kind of sewers connected to private homes was the easy access flies had to human waste, transmitting then pathogens to people. So, was life better? Yes. But how better? It was important though to point out that it was still better to have sewers, because when you have a big urban area, so like a big city in the classical period, the other alternative to having sewers is people dropping their waste on the streets, which would be even worse. So yes, sewers were better than an uncontrolled situation in a big growing city. However, probably you would have had a healthier life with less illnesses if you just lived in a rural house and you just went out in the fields and came back to your home remaining away from the sewers. So to reiterate, if we were living in the classical period, best situation to have your rural little house in the countryside. Second, live in a big city with sewers. Worst situation, live in a big city without sewers. Another thing that is really difficult for us to understand is the fact that many Roman toilets, not only they didn't have their own separate room, but they were in the kitchen. So in the kitchen room, you have the area where you cook, and right next to it, basically the toilet. So the reason for that is that the Romans used the toilet also to throw away things. So let's say you're cooking and you're, I don't know, peeling oranges and you have all this peel, you would just throw it down the toilet. So yeah, that makes sense, but still, it's kind of disgusting that they would have the toilet in the same room where they would cook. But hey, that's how they did things. So what did the Romans throw down the toilets then? What can we learn about the diet of the common people? Well, the first thing we learn is the quality and variability of foods. For example, let's have a look at the Herculaneum sewers content excavated by archaeologists. The reason why this specific archaeological dig is important is because it was connected to an apartment complex that housed a large number of mostly poorer people. We know the rich had a good and varied diet, but what did the common people eat? Well, apparently, so did they. They also had a good and varied diet, which is very different from what we commonly believe. The evidence from the Herculaneum shows that people across the class spectrum were eating many different types of food, most commonly figs, eggs, olives, grapes, shellfish, seasonings, dill, mint, coriander, mustard seeds, and a high number of fish bones. So a healthy and varied diet also for the poor, and most likely the residents cooked at home a lot more than we would think. Of course, the Romans thought there were monsters lurking in the toilets. I mean, wouldn't you, in the same situation? The Roman writer Claudius Aelianus writes a story about an octopus that swam up through a drain in a toilet and ate the pickled fish in the pantry night after night. Now, did that really happen? Who knows? Probably not, but it is highly possible that the person who came up with this rather interesting story was inspired by actual real experiences of possibly rats and other animals crawling up the toilet from the sewers and invading private homes. Now, because of animals, or perhaps imagining monsters, a certain amount of Romans were uncomfortable when using public latrines, so much so that we can find shrines of the goddess Fortuna near latrines, obviously to protect people from sad monsters or illness. Alright, so I hope you found this information interesting, and I will link down below a page that I used as one of the sources for making this video. There is also some interesting information about a university professor that I will link and name below, who actually has a book on all these things if you're interested. As always, thank you very much for watching, noble ones, and remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Goodbye.